Hey everyone, it's Marco again. I've had a lot of requests on my stream for how to do macros, so I'd like to show you. If you need to zoom in here on the top left, feel free. If you want to take screenshots, feel free. It might help you a little bit. So there's a couple types of macros that you will need as a prot warrior in PvP. The first kind is one that simply changes your stance. So as a prot warrior and as an arms warrior, I do not tie a specific key that all it does is change my stance, okay, between the three stances. I do not have a button that goes defensive stance, and then I push something else to say do a shield block. So the way I do it is inside this row 1 through 0 here, that you have down here, these will change when you change stances. So one of the things I came up with, many years ago was to change stance in these buttons here, and then also tie the ability on the other side. So for example, I have a shield block macro here. When I push it once in battle stance, I push it, it puts me in defensive stance, and now I'm ready to hit it again and the shield block is used, excuse me. So how's that macro work? It also works in Zerker. I put it in the same spot. So I'm pushing the same button across all three specs to do that. So let's check it out. Shield block. Show tooltip, shield block. When you are creating a macro and you use the pound show tooltip, if you're not sure exactly how the ability is spelled, like for example, instead of being a single word, shield block is 2 words, sometimes it's not obvious. If you open up your spell book and you go to the tree where the ability is, you can push shift the ability and it'll fill it out in the macro line, okay? So what I do is I do cast shield block. And then if I'm in defensive, if I'm in stance 3 or stance 1, so battle or Zerker, I go into defensive stance. The reason I put all this here is so that I can use the same macro across all 3 stances to do this one thing, cast shield block. You could also do it when you're in battle stance. You could have this button just say show tooltip, shield block, cast, if cast stance 1, defensive stance. But why do that? Put it all in one macro. There you go. That's how I cast shield block. Okay. And we're not playing arms, so we don't have to worry about switching to a 2-hander. So what's another ability where you might want to switch your stance? Shield wall. It looks very similar. If I'm in stance 2, I cast shield wall. Stance 3, defensive stance. Stance 1, defensive stance. It does the same thing, the same structure as shield block. It's just I also put a modifier in here to make sure I'm on stance 2. Either of these will work, and that's why I'm showing you both of them. There's oftentimes multiple ways to skin a cat with these macros. Now that's one type of macro where you want to switch stances in order to use an ability. I like to tie it in to the same macro, one macro across all 3 stances that does the work for you. And then depending on which stance you're in, it either uses the ability or switches the stance. Now something that's a little more complicated is hamstring. So my hamstring macro, depending on what stance I'm in, will still be usable. So in Zerker stance, I can still hamstring. But if I'm in defensive stance, I have to make a choice. Am I going to battle or Zerker? In this case, I have it default to battle. If, let's say, I wanted to go from defensive to Zerker instead, I would use another ability that depends on Zerker stance to swap to Zerker and then push hamstring. If I'm in defensive and I just want the hamstring, I push the hamstring button and it puts me in battle. Okay? So what I would do in defensive is I would hit another ability over here, Whirlwind, which requires Berserker stance. When you click these macros once, it just does the work of putting you into the stance. It doesn't actually cast the ability. So now I could hamstring, having used my Whirlwind macro to get into Berserker stance. Okay? So that's the power of this setup. Instead of having one macro per stance and then using another ability button, you're basically saving a bunch of buttons. All right. Now another ability that will switch you to defensive stance, for example, is disarm. So disarm is my 5 key. When I'm in Berserker or battle stance, if I push 5 once, it puts me in defensive stance. And if I push it again, I disarm. So that's the example of like swapping, right? But let's go back to hamstring now. This one's a little more complicated because you have the ability to use hamstring in either of these stances, like I talked about. And so this is the macro I use. The other problem with hamstring is I sometimes want to mouse over hamstring and not waste my white attack on the target I'm hamstringing. This goes for shield bash as well. If you target another a person when you're trying to kill someone, let's say you switch targets and you hit the healer with your white attack, you've wasted that white attack because you have no intention of killing one target, yet you hit them with your white ability, your auto attack. So having a mouse over is really critical, especially in arenas. You do not want to waste attacks ever on something you don't plan on killing. So mouse over is in the middle here. But first, I put a start attack on. Start attack's really important. Don't worry, if you do a mouse over hamstring, your start attack will apply to the target that you're already targeting and not the mouse over. So this won't break you. I put the start attack at the beginning and the end to make sure it happens. I've heard people say put it in the front. I've heard people say put it at the end. I put it at both. It doesn't matter. Start attack doesn't do anything if you're already attacking. So first thing it does is it starts attack. Then it checks, am I in defensive stance, which is stance 2. Okay, let's go to battle. This is the part I said where I had a choice. I could have it default to battle or Zerker. I chose to go to battle by default. If for some reason I wanted to go into Zerker, like if no one's hitting me and I want that extra crit, then I would use my whirlwind macro to switch over, and then I would hamstring. Okay, like I said before. But now let's go through the normal use case. If I target someone that is a mouse over and exists, then you can hamstring. This exists helps with, I believe, when they're dead. So if a player is dead and you've moused over them and you try to use this macro, it's not going to do anything. It'll just automatically go to the next part, which it says, if I'm in stance 1 or 3, cast my hamstring. So if you mouse over a dead target, I believe that is what the exists will take care of for you, and you won't do anything. And then it goes down to the next stance, which next line, which is, okay, cast the hamstring. And obviously start attack at the end to make sure it happens. This allows you to mouse over hamstring this dude, for example, while I'm hitting that dude, right? That's the whole point of it. So that's another case where here's another reason to have a macro. What else? You also could write macros for things like intervene. Like you could target someone. You should do, you know, /target and like my partner Jandirion, and this way I will automatically target him. Right now you don't need this cast defensive stance because intervene, intercept, and charge as a Prot warrior can be used anywhere as long as you have the talent Warbringer. So there's an example where I could target a teammate and intervene. So if you're playing with a teammate that can't drop a pet or a totem, then you're only ever going to intervene them. So this is nice. You could also do in like 3s and 5s, you could set up macros with modifiers to target, you know, party 1, party 2, that kind of thing. Now, if you're finished with your macros and you're done writing them, hitting save is not enough. Okay, if you were to like Alt F4 out of the game, or the game were to crash, or depending on how you log out, it doesn't necessarily save your macros. So the way to save them is to do /reload. /reload. Just a little error there with DBM. Now my macros are locked in. If I go back down here to macros, anything that I've changed is now in the game. Are there any other macros that you care about? There is. So something I'm not doing right now, but which I think I will for arenas. You're going to be fearing a target and not wanting to break the fear sometimes, but maybe you want to sunder that target. So the way I would do that is I would not use Devastate to hit the target at that point. But if I hit Sunder, I'm going to auto attack him. So one thing you can do is you can go into your spellbook and you can create a mouse over macro for sundering, just like I did here with hamstring. So all I would do is I would, you know, make sure, I don't care what stance I'm in to sunder, it doesn't have a thing. So I would get rid of this. Here, let's make it together, okay? We'll do a new. Let's do a mouse over sunder. So it puts all the warrior abilities up top for you. If you're playing, whatever class you're playing goes up here. So you should be able to find your ability up towards the top of the screen. You shouldn't have to go down into the other classes. I like that about Wrath. All right, so we'll call it mouse over sunder, okay? Next, I'm going to take the hand... Oh, Tyrannosaur. That was the guy I raided. That's why I had it in there. Let's go to hamstring. We'll copy this. Where'd my sunder go? Oopsie. There it is. You can have general macros, which are all your classes and characters, or you can go to specific macros, which are for your character only. Generally, I would put them in the general unless it's getting confusing, then put them in the specific one. Okay. So back to my Sunder. Where did it go? All right, so we're not going to show the tooltip for this. I don't remember. Is it Sunder? Is it Sunder Armor? Let me just shift click it here, Sunder Armor. Make sure there's no space at the end, okay? Now next up, I don't want to start attack. I just want to Sunder the target. In case I am targeting them, this will allow me to Sunder them directly without hitting them back as well. I don't care what stance I'm in, so we're going to get rid of these. And all I'm going to say is cast target equals mouse over exists Sunder Armor. But what if it is my target and I do want to Sunder Armor on him? Then I would just do cast Sunder Armor here. The way the macros work, if any of the lines execute some kind of command to the character, the macro ends. So in the first line here, it says cast on the mouse over if it exists a Sunder Armor. So let's say I was mousing over this guy. I hit Sunder Armor, but I have this guy targeted, okay? So I mouse over, I'm sundering him. What if my mouse isn't on him? Well, then when I do this, the cast mouse over exists will fail. It'll go to the next line. And let's say I'm near this guy. I start sundering. He's my target. The Sunder will go on him. There's no start attack, so I'm not going to actually hit my target. I'm just going to Sunder them. I hit save here, and now I hit /reload, and it is saved. So hopefully that helps you guys with how to write macros. I can real quick go over what macros I'm currently using on which abilities. I don't think you really need an overpower macro as a Prot warrior. So far I haven't had a reason, except very, very rarely on a rogue or a high avoidance character where my revenge was off cooldown and my shockwave is off cooldown and my thunderclap is off cooldown. I just gotta try to hit him with something. All right, I'll do an overpower. It's very, very rare, but in general, all I do with this is I just change the stance to battle, and then behind the, I say behind because here it's like I click and there's something behind it. I just put overpower there. Same with Zerker to overpower. So there's basically a macro on every ability that requires a stance. There is a macro on every ability that I would use to, let's say, target a specific teammate. For example, you could write macros for vigilance to target your teammate in arena if you only have one, or a party member. And I also have macros for mouse over, hamstring, shield bash, sunder, etc. So I think you should do the work of reading through your abilities and reading what they do, not just on the talents, but also in your spell book, because talents only tell half the story. So make sure you pay attention to your racials. And for example, the orcs changed, so now fist weapons are also included in their expertise. In general, try to be inquisitive about your character and how they function. Now, one last thing, I want to show off this new build that I made for my warrior. I don't have a lot of great gear or access to great gear at the moment, but this guy is pretty deadly in PvP right now. I did change it up so my block value is double what it was before, more than double, and this makes it so my shield slams are worth using all the time. Revenge is still very powerful and worth hitting at the same rate that shield slam is, but if I have my cooldowns, shield slam will hit harder than any ability in my toolkit. So that rockets it up to the top used ability, and then devastates or filler when I don't have revenges and I don't have shield slams. Now what's the downside? I lost 12% crit, I lost 120 resilience. So I'm a little easier to kill. I also lost like 2,000 armor because my tanking pieces aren't that good. They're Warbringer, they're Zulaman Jungle Stompers. You know, they're not the best. There's a Signet Last Defender is probably the best item I have in this build, right? So this is just another option for people. If you want to go the full attack power build, keep in mind that your shield slams now are primarily only used when you have shield block up and you're like disarming and bashing for 20% extra damage. That's really only when the shield slams are used, or to like break a bubble on a priest. There's no reason other than that, those two specific examples, really to be bashing that much. You know, maybe take a bubble off a mage or something. But in general, your shield slams are just there as utility or a burst window when you have block value up. Even with block value up, you're going to be hitting about as hard as a revenge. So your revenge is still your best ability. And then whenever you don't have shield block up and revenge is on cooldown, then you just spam Devastate with this build because you got 40% crit, you have basically no block value, and you have a ton of resilience. You are mostly a tank in PvP. You're trying your best to CC the enemy team, you're trying to debuff them, and your damage is not very bursty even with shield block. But if you can just fit in a couple of tanking pieces, you become a whole new character. Now don't go overboard and just do all block value like I do here in this set, which is very silly. I've got 1683 block value. At that point, you've got no resilience, and you're going to get destroyed unless you're like full Sunwell gear. So I recommend some kind of hybrid build. Pay attention to your hit rating. If I was min-maxing, I'd get some hit gems to make sure I had 5% hit. But this is the kind of work you're going to have to do to figure out what's best in Wrath of the Lich King. And I'm excited to get there and relearn the game. I haven't played in so long. And get to see all the new, streamers and players who are trying out Prot PvP. Hopefully this video helped. It was a little longer than I wanted to go, but I felt like it was necessary. All right, guys, good luck and have fun.